right. Good morning, everybody. I think we're starting to let people in. Our guest today is Lori Shinton, who is the CEO of Hands On Nashville. Lori, thank you for being on the show today. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Sure. It's a beautiful day in Nashville. It's not so hot. I've been out and about. I don't know. I think we're going to have rain later today. I don't think it's going to be as bad. Those situations going on in Eastern Kentucky are just horrible right now. I think I was listening to the news this morning when I was driving around, and they were talking about, I think they're saying the thing in Eastern Kentucky is a 1,000-year flood. But they're saying it doesn't happen like every thousand years. That's just what their estimate is, and that's the percentage that they use to figure out what the chances are of having a flood. But they're also saying they're starting to happen more, and at least the reporter was saying it's a result of climate change. So it's just unfortunate, but there are lots of people that can be helpful, volunteers, and that's why we're talking to Lori today on Hands On Nashville. Lori, while we're letting people in, I usually ask an irrelevant question. Obviously, you're in your office because I see the Hands On Nashville thing in before, and I was commenting that it looks like you've got a soccer ball to your right, but it's not a soccer ball wall. What is it? What is going on over there?
So, and we moved fairly recently, and we're over on a perimeter drive. And so we set up a room. We moved after the pandemic. And so it taught us we probably might need a room where we hop on Zoom meetings. And so this is a noise reducer. So if other things are happening in the office, we don't have to hear it while we're working on Zoom, although I can hear planes overhead, just FYI.
Why don't you put the soccer ball wall up on the ceiling as well?
I think that might be the trick.
Okay, well, that's if you do that, you can name the wall after me. How's that?
Okay.
Does it work? Does that sound reducer stuff work pretty well, except for the planes flying above your head?
It does. I actually have a room, just right across the hall of some volunteers who have come to help us with some strategic planning that Hands On Nashville is going through. And when I shut the door here getting ready for this meeting, I could not hear them anymore.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that's good to know in case we have. And can other groups, like if I needed to do a Zoom call and not be bothered, could I come over and use it?
Oh, sure. Just let us know and we'll schedule you right in.
Okay, I'll let you know. Well, our guest today is Lori Shinton, the CEO of Hands On Nashville. Again, I'm looking outside. It's really hard to tell what it's going to do, but I just know it's not as hot. And and I know that there are things either happening this week or getting ready to happen next weekend, like the race around the city is scheduled. I think I heard somebody tell me today that World Wrestling Federation, something's going on with that. There's always something going on downtown. I can't keep up sometimes, but and we do have a council meeting scheduled for next Tuesday. Again, I looked at the calendar. It looks pretty long. We have a number of public hearing bills up, and there's always something on that calendar that's of interest to people. Well, let's get started. Lori, our first question that I always ask all of my guests is tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? And what have you been doing all these years? And how did you get to become the CEO at Hands On Nashville?
Sure. So I am a native Tennessean. I am from Clarksville, born and raised. I lived in Chattanooga for about 5 years, but I've lived in Tennessee my whole life. And when I moved back to Clarksville, I was about 22 or 23. I went to Austin Peay and got a degree in social work, and then went to the University of Tennessee and got my master's. And I started my career doing pretty direct clinical services, doing therapy, et cetera. And I chose to leave that path and went to work through the University of Tennessee Social Work Office of Research and Public something, they had a contract with the state of Tennessee. They were running a mental health program for people on TANF. And so I ended up running that program, and I would have never thought this, but I stayed with the state government for about 11 years. And it was really some of the best time of my professional experience. I worked with some of the brightest people at the state that I've ever worked with. And it was a lot of fun, but it was a lot of responsibility. And I decided eventually it was time for me to kind of get back to my roots and go back into the nonprofit arena. And so when I left the state, I went to the YWCA, and I was their first COO at the YWCA here in Nashville. I stayed there about 3 years, and Brian Williams, who was the CEO of Hands On Nashville, he was working with us on a project, and he and I kind of hit it off pretty good. He recruited me over to Hands On Nashville, and this was about 2015. And he said, hey, we grew a lot during the flood, and I'm not sure we have the infrastructure in place to manage that growth. Could you come over and help us out? And I did. And in 2016, Brian ended up resigning, and I became the interim and then eventually the CEO.
Where'd you go to school in Clarksville, high school wise?
Clarksville High.
Clarksville High School. And then, so you're like me, I've never lived anywhere else. I've always lived in the state of Tennessee.
Yep.
And I'm from East Tennessee, and then I've lived in Nashville, and that's it. So, yeah, we're Tennesseans, true and true.
That's right.
So tell me what you were at the Department of Human Services when you were at the state?
Yes.
Okay. And which commissioners did you work under?
So when I started, oh gosh, her name is blanking. I started with the state at the very end of Sunquist's term. Natasha Metcalf was the commissioner.
Sure.
And then
was it Jenna?
Yes, Jenna Lodge was our commissioner for 8 years under Governor Bredesen.
Okay.
And I left shortly into the next administration, which was Bill Haslam's.
Okay. It's interesting because I spent a number of years at the state and worked in different departments, and there are some amazingly talented people over there, and sometimes they don't get the recognitions that they should get for some of the stuff they've done. But there are some really, really talented people that spend their lives over at the state just trying to do good work. And I don't know. It's because I spent, obviously, like I said, a number of years over there.
Jim, I got to tell you, that's one of the first times, because I'll always say that about state employees, because having been a state employee, they get underrated a lot. And I'm telling you, it's the first time I've had someone concur with me, but they're some of the brightest minds that we have are working for the state. And thankfully they are, because what happens there impacts so many people.
Well, yeah. And a lot of times people get a bad rap, but I'm just telling you, really, really some very, very good people working at the state. So you went over to YWCA, and then you ended up at Hands On Nashville. A lot of people know, they've heard of Hands On Nashville. I mean, I volunteered with Hands On Nashville. Tell us, what is currently, how would you describe Hands On Nashville right now? It's been around and done some tremendous work for the city, but tell us what it is. What is Hands On Nashville now?
Yeah, so Hands On Nashville is a particular kind of nonprofit. We are a volunteer resource center. That's how I always describe us. And our mission is to meet community needs through volunteerism. So we act as a conduit or a vehicle for people to engage in volunteerism. And the main way we do that is through our community partner program. We partner with close to 200 nonprofits, and they post their volunteer opportunities through us. And we do some things like for younger nonprofits that are just getting started and don't really have their name out there, we give them recognition, and people get to know them through us. And a lot of people that move into the city don't really know where to get started with a nonprofit. So a lot of times they come through us and they, volunteer for a lot of organizations, and sometimes they find one they connect with and they stay there and, like that. So we do a lot of other things besides that, but I would say that's like the core of who we are. And then everything we do though has very particular, it's very specifically about volunteerism. So we run a program called Geek Calls. It's a skilled volunteer program where nonprofits can come and say, hey, I need my website. I need an audit of my website. And we have volunteers in our database that list that as a skill that they need. And then we do matching and we connect that skilled volunteer with that IT need, and that project happens. And then we also work with corporate partners to engage them in volunteerism, throughout the city. That's another big piece of what we do. And then probably what we're best known for by the general public is our disaster response. And so if you didn't know us before, you might have gotten to know us in 2020 when the tornado came through and we launched into disaster mode. And then we had like 4 events to respond to after the tornado.
Well, so we'll drill down on each of those things. Let's start with the disaster recovery and the disaster help. So obviously Nashville has been through quite a lot of challenges over the last 15 years, whether it was 2010, whether it was 2020, whether it was, flooding that happened 2021. How does, maybe 2 questions. How does it work? How does all of a sudden, you're just like everybody else. You're sitting there and all of a sudden this, we get hit with the tornadoes in 2020. And all of a sudden you wake up in the morning and we've got a disaster on our hands. What happens? What do you all do at that point? And then the second question, which I'll come back to, is basically, what do we learn from that so that we're ready to go even before a disaster next time, so that, we all kind of know if something happens, what we're supposed to do. So let's go to the first question first. You wake up, in March of 2020, we're still trying to figure out what a pandemic is. And there's a devastating tornado that comes through and rips part of Nashville. What do you all do at that point?
So I will tell you what we did and kind of jump into a little bit of the second part of the question, but I got a call from the Office of Emergency Management and they said, hey, Lori, we need you here. And I said, I'm already on my way. So even though I had not had a disaster here, I already knew my place was to be at the Office of Emergency Management, their command center. And so that's so that I could know what was happening in real time, where it was okay to go into with volunteers, where it wasn't, what was the amount of devastation, how many neighborhoods would hit, all of those things that you learn when you're in there. And I am communicating back to my team. So what happens for Hands On Nashville, everything that we're working on before the disaster gets put on pause. And all of my team switches into roles that we have developed now. At that point, they weren't developed. We just did it ad hoc. And we switched into disaster response mode. So what we did then is we went out to the places that had already popped up as natural distribution sites, like State Representative Reverend Love, his church was operating a distribution, and I sent staff over there to be helpful, to help communicate what we were learning, to see what their needs were, how could we direct volunteers and things. So that kind of happened all over the city. With my team, as we began to figure out where do people need volunteers and what kind of volunteers and how do we make that happen.
Okay. So you're just like it. I did the same thing, when I wake up in the morning and realize or hear, early on what's going on. And then at 7 o'clock, I'm headed over to where the mayor is, so I can at least understand what's going on. So your role is you immediately went to the Office of Emergency Management, and then you distribute people across the board to figure out what's going on. So what then becomes overall the role of Hands on Nashville? And I can imagine that the first day is chaos.
Yes.
Because, I met up with council member Kathleen Murphy, and we just go to East Nashville with nothing except we're going to try to be helpful. Right. And so you start helping, and there were people everywhere, neighborhoods and neighbors, all just helping out at that point. But do you all kind of wait for a day or two before? And I assume people start calling you immediately and going like, I want to help. Where do I go? Mm-hmm. So tell us what that's like.
Well, so what we call that in our field is those neighbors, and there were hundreds of them that just went out to the streets with their chainsaws and said, let's go, let's clear this. We call that like spontaneous or unaffiliated volunteers. Meaning it's just people helping people. That happens right, as you say, within hours of the event happening. What we do, because we're at the Office of Emergency Management, what people don't realize is that when power lines are down and sometimes there's gas leaks, it may or may not actually be safe for people to be doing what they're doing. And so the Office of Emergency Management is trying to figure that out. And so I'm working with them the whole time to say, when is a neighborhood safe for us to begin debris removal? And so we begin setting up opportunities on our website, or we flip a page on our website that says, if you want to help with the tornado, sign up here. Well, we had 25,000 people hit that website the first week of the tornado. It actually crashed our website about 5 times, which I'm not proud of, but it just shows the compassion that people have after a disaster. And so it really, our first real hands-on led volunteer project in coordination with the mayor's office was actually out in Hermitage that first weekend, because there was already things happening in some of the other neighborhoods, and Hermitage had not really been talked about. So we went and helped set up a supply distribution place at a church out there. And we probably had, 500 or so volunteers show up that weekend to canvass to let people know where they could get help, things like that. So we do that throughout the early phase of a disaster, is really coordinate and take volunteers in to do specific tasks that are needed at the time.
Well, logistically, I can imagine this is a nightmare. So I'm going back in my head. So I just told you what I did. People do want to help. They immediately want to come out and help. And they will bring chainsaws because they were out there, and they will bring whatever else they think that might be helpful. And then they just do what is necessary. Some people are, I remember, that morning there was somebody brought food out, a local restaurant. Now I can't remember who it was. They had brought food out, and they were just distributing food. They had just set up on the street, and they said, this is what we feel like we could be helpful with. So there's this massive effort right at the very beginning to do whatever you can to be helpful. But I also know that can be a mess because there are people everywhere. And so it sounds like what you're trying to do is let the first wave pass, because there's no control over that anyway. But then figure out, working with OEM, what do we need and where are the services needed? And I think I remember being out in Hermitage that weekend, and there were people out there helping, and it looked like it was much more organized.
Yeah, so that kind of leads into the second part of your question. What we learned is and I don't mean just Hands on Nashville, I mean OEM and all of our partners in disaster. We have been working since the tornado to really try to figure out and coordinate our response. It's always going to be hectic. There's no way to get away from that. But how can we streamline it and smooth it out? So part of our plans in the future are to have pre-designated spots around the city where it will be near enough to a disaster that you can actually direct volunteers to. They get assignments and then they go in. So it's hopefully not as much as a free-for-all, because that's hard, mainly because of the safety issue that I cited. That there are power lines down that are hot. There's gas leaks. There's things happening that really aren't safe. And we're pretty lucky, and have been in those first few days, that nothing bad has happened to anybody that's just trying to help. So we put together a coalition of nonprofits and churches it's called the Nashville VOAD, Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. And so we coordinate with about 40 nonprofits that we're doing that exact thing. What do we need to do to be prepared? How are we going to deploy? How are we going to not duplicate services and things like that? And so we've been working for a good year and a half on that. And we have plans, and that the way our plans are working, the city is also revising their emergency management plan. So for those of you who don't know, they have like a red folder that's about that thick that goes into their emergency plan. And so we're working on that together for the parts that nonprofits play a role in, so that it will actually match what we're planning to do. So we're developing a real comprehensive strategy to respond.
Okay, and I think that's a really, really sound idea. I guess the question would be, once you get that kind of finalized, how do you get the word out so that we all don't come, hopefully we never have another disaster, but assuming that we do, the spirit of Nashville is very strong, and people want to go out and be helpful.
Right.
And so their first take is, I've got to go. I've got to go do something and be helpful.
Yep.
But it's unorganized. So how do you get the word out before the next disaster so that people go, oh, I know what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to go check in here, and they're going to tell me how I can be most helpful. So is there discussions about how you get the word out to people so they kind of know what they're supposed to do?
I'm glad you changed that from is there a plan or are there discussions? There are discussions about how to do that. We do work with Jim Hawk at the Neighbor to Neighbor, who works with all the neighborhood associations. And so Hands On Nashville is partnering with them in September for one of their conferences. And so really just educating people really to also be personally prepared. These are things that we're trying to figure out how to accomplish. So not only am I personally prepared, but if something happens in my neighborhood and I'm not impacted, what should I do? Those are education pieces. And you bring up a good point in that, because we have not had a disaster in a very long time, since 2010, essentially. After the tornado, someone on the council finally got in touch with me and said, hey, I think you need to help us understand what Hands On Nashville does, because they were basically trying to create many pop-up services to do the thing that we would do, but no one knew we would do it. So how do we keep that education in front of people so that they know those things? That definitely is top of mind for us.
Well, and I think that's really good. Again, having been through a number of these things, I'm going back to 1995 or 96 when the tornado popped through East Nashville, to all the different things that Nashville has experienced, particularly some over the last couple of years. Again, people want to be helpful. And I can see council members setting up their own volunteer organ, because they're not sure what to do. And that's why we always try to learn from these things to say, and I think I remember, initially, particularly after the tornadoes in 2020, organizations coming before the council, and I think
Yes.
Hands On was one of them, and just said, okay, this is the information.
Right.
So I could see you all, once you finish your discussions, putting together something that goes on, Channel 3, is presented to the council, so that and we get the word out so that people do know what to do, both personally and if they want to go out and volunteer, what's the best way to make the biggest difference, I guess.
Yeah,
So,
we would love that, because I did go to the city council. I think it was the first week of the tornado and said, here's what we're doing, here's what we're planning. But to do that without a disaster happening, I think people can actually retain all of that a little better and know, oh, here's what we do when a thing happens.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about some of the other things that you all do. Most people, I always associated Hands on Nashville with there's a big volunteer day. It's a day to go help work on school buildings or other stuff. Do you all have still activities where it's kind of like a big thing where people, where there's a particular day set aside to do something in particular for the city? Or is it more, do you have more specific? I know you have the website and we'll talk about that, but do you all have big day ticket items where people can come in and volunteer?
We have not had a big day ticket item like that since before the pandemic. And a little bit of that has been, we have not gotten back to it because a lot of it is we've been in disaster response mode for a couple of years. And the things we talked about, and then we can leave disaster, we talked about what we do in the first few days, first 30, 60, 90 days, but our work actually continues, for until everybody's recovered. And so that can be a year, that can be two, depending on the disaster. So we don't currently have that. It used to be called Hands on Nashville Day is the day you're thinking of. And we would do it in the fall. And over the last few years, we went into the school system, we go into anywhere from 13 to 25 schools, take a Saturday morning and revitalize it, paint it, get playgrounds ready, things like that. What I have heard from our community partners since I have been at Hands on Nashville is that they always need those one-off volunteer opportunities where someone comes in and helps refresh. But what they are looking for are more long-term volunteers, people that get committed to them. And I don't mean forever, and I don't even mean spending, hours and hours and hours weekly, but whatever time that you give, a consistency of a volunteer to a nonprofit means they don't have to retrain you to do the thing you're doing. You kind of become a part of them. And so more and more nonprofits are looking for those types of volunteers to really help expand the services they provide. So we try to focus on that for them.
And can you all help people with that? So I will tell you, I think I helped paint us outside of a school building or a portal one time, and I probably did more damage than help when I was doing that. But having said that, does your program help connect, because we got a couple of questions about that over the week, connect volunteers to a particular agency? So, if somebody really is very interested in working with Metro schools, can they use Hands on Nashville as a way in? And then can you connect them if they really are going like, what, I really like doing this and I want to stay doing this as a volunteer. Do you all help people do that?
Well, I would say really we're the vehicle for that. Because what happens, we have volunteers that they want a variety in their volunteer experience. So they utilize us throughout their volunteer career to go to this nonprofit, that one, this one. But a lot of people, they use us and they find an organization that they really connect with, and that's where they want to give their time. And so honestly, we lose track of them because what happens is they connect with that organization, they become super volunteers to them, and the organization is communicating with them directly. For us, for Hands on Nashville, that's a success story. Like if we lose volunteers because they have connected with an agency and are working with them long-term, that's a success story for us. We like that to happen.
No, I think that's really good. Let me ask you this, because we got a question about this. If you have a specific expertise, like I know that I'm not a good painter, so that wouldn't be a good example. But if I were, if I have, I'm a gardener. You were talking about understanding computer operations and systems and things like that. Can you, if I have something and I'm going like, this is what I like doing and I'm halfway decent at it. Can you match people up with some expertise? I know you talked about the computer stuff, but
So we're still working on that beyond the computer piece. But when you sign up to register with Hands On Nashville, you fill out a volunteer profile and you have the opportunity, you can skip by it, or you can fill out a skills profile. And you can say, I have this skill, I have that skill, I have this skill. And so then that allows when a nonprofit puts an opportunity that says, hey, I need this skill set, that allows them to see if volunteers actually have it or not. We don't really vet those and we don't have a good way to do that just yet. However, we do have a new recommendation engine that when you say, I, Lori, am interested in volunteering with animals, and I'm interested in education, and I'm interested in something else, we do matching in that way. So we're going to get an email. I'm going to get an email that says, Lori, here's this opportunity to volunteer with animals that's coming up this month. And here's one for education. So we're working towards doing that by skill sets as well. But right now it's based on volunteers' interest.
Okay. So take people through, and we'll pick up a couple of the other things that you do maybe this way. Okay. So I'm new to Nashville. I'm interested in being involved and learning more about the city. I like to volunteer. So somebody says, you should check out Hands On Nashville. All right. So talk us through, or take us through the steps of what a person can do to find out what opportunities are out there. So I assume, I would guess that the best way to start is going to your website. But
Right.
take me through what would you tell me to do if I'm just brand new and I'm interested in getting engaged?
Well, you nailed it. I would first tell you to go to hon.org. So that's our website. Go to hon.org, and there's multiple ways you can search. So you can go to our volunteer opportunity calendar, and that's going to literally look like a calendar with days of the week and the dates. And you're going to see all of these opportunities for volunteerism. So at a glance, you can look and see, oh, here's some arts and culture opportunities, here's some pet opportunities, whatever. You're going to fill out a profile. And it's real quick and easy. We don't require, we try to make it as easy as possible for people, but you'll sign an account with Hands On Nashville. So I'll put in my email address and I will say I want to volunteer. I'll put in a little bit of whatever required information is, and the rest of it is optional. And then if I am at that calendar and I say, oh, I'm interested in arts and culture, I'm going to sign up for this and learn about this organization. I just click on that and I sign up as a volunteer, and I will get an email notification that reminds me of that volunteer opportunity. And then often that community partner will communicate as well. And I will go and show up, and it'll tell you in those opportunities, here's the time, here's where to show up, here's the appropriate clothing, if you're doing something outside and you need closed-toed shoes or whatever. But you can also search our website, as I mentioned, by partner or by interest area and things like that. And so now newly, when you sign up for a profile, you can say, here are the things I'm interested in. And you'll get emails every other week or once a month that say, here are some opportunities in those areas you're interested in. So that new thing takes our technology a step forward for people who opt in for that.
All right. So I remember going on that website a couple of years ago, probably more like several years ago. And a lot of the thing, it's like, oh, that sounds interesting. And then I would run up into, they needed 12 slots and slots are already all filled up. And it's like, okay, well, I'll try to do it again another time. I think I started looking, and a lot of the slots that were filled up in the evenings, because it's where people who are working during the day can then volunteer at night. and it looked like a lot of the slots that were open were during the day. But I haven't been on that for a while. Does that still happen? And do a lot of those slots, particularly in the evening, get filled up with some of your corporate folks who, want to do something as a group and want to do something that is helpful?
I would say I don't really know, and I don't want to make it up, but so I'm not really sure what gets filled more in terms of time slots versus other time slots. I do know that we tell our partners we need at least, like, for you to be successful at getting enough people, ideally you put that opportunity out 2 weeks in advance. Sometimes people want to pop it up for the next day, and you're really not going to be too successful that way. So one thing we do know is the more time it has to live on the website, the more people that see it and have the opportunity to sign up.
Okay. All right. Well, and I just would always kind of maneuver around and make sure that it worked on my schedule. But
Right.
I often thought, particularly when I was at the Commission on Aging, it's like, well, wait a minute. If they're having trouble filling volunteer opportunities during the day, those are good opportunities for people who are either older or who may be retired or are off work for a period of time or whatever, where they could pick up those opportunities and do things as well. So we encourage people to look at your website, and particularly look during the day when things were necessary. That was easier for some people. Tell me this, and again, it's been a while since I looked at the website, but and you've talked about some of it, things that you all do, so I've been associated with Hands on Nashville. I've worked in the garden. I have schools. I have cleaned the inside of, I cleaned, one time I was working at Dismas House for a Hands on Nashville project. I painted a portable building at a school. I still remember that. So there's lots of different things you can do. Tell us some of the stuff. You talked about animals, you talked about other stuff. What are some of the things that if people went looking on the website and were interested, what are the typical things that you do? And then maybe share with us one or two things that people probably don't know that they could volunteer to do that might be interesting.
All right. So for Hands on Nashville led projects, meaning our staff are leading the volunteers, that happens really in a couple of ways. It happens in disaster work, and it happens with corporate partners. So we work a lot with corporations that say, hey, we want to engage 200 or 250 people in a volunteer event on this day, and here's the area we want to do. And we help facilitate that because a lot of times, sometimes nonprofits can manage that, but a lot of times nonprofits couldn't manage a group of 200 volunteers to come in and do a thing. So just recently, we worked with a convention group. They had about 450 volunteers, and we worked with Friends of Shelby and went over to Shelby Park, and we built picnic tables, and we did invasive species removal. And I mean, they were all over the place, picking up trash, building trash bins, cleaning the playground. It was building kits. So there were people everywhere doing a thing. But we have done things that, so the picnic tables and the trash bins, if you see new ones out there, that was from that project. But we have done things like build outdoor classrooms for schools. So in corporate projects or corporate groups are the ones that have done those things. So, schools don't necessarily have a budget for an outdoor classroom, but it's on their wish list. And those are the kinds of things that we have the opportunity to match this corporation that wants to give back, this school that has a need, and we're kind of the conduit to make that happen. It's a really, it's beneficial for us because it helps fund things that we do that, other parts of our nonprofit program, but it helps these organizations that have a need that budgetarily can't make that happen. So that's those are the two areas where Hands on Nashville really leads projects. But in terms of finding projects within the Hands on Nashville umbrella, it literally is everything. I mean, it could be going and refurbishing a playground, or it could be tutoring a child. You know, that's a more long-term commitment. Or it could be working a shift in a thrift store, working with, you know, Second Harvest, you name it, and you really, it doesn't really matter what area of interest you have, you can find a vehicle to that via our partners in Hands on Nashville. One of the things that every now and then, and this may surprise people because board development happens, you know, people serving on boards happens in a multitude of ways, but there are times that our partners will actually put a long-term volunteer opportunity and they put out a request for board members. So that's probably one that would surprise people, that you could actually sometimes go and find a board service opportunity. Also, they do things like they ask for graphic designers. So sometimes they ask for specific skill sets to help them do a thing that, again, budgetarily, they're unable to do. And that's really, to me, is what's so neat about volunteerism, is that even if you don't have money, you can go and give your time, and it helps that organization expand what they're doing in one way or another.
Let me ask you about a couple of things that, as you were talking, I was just interested in. Obviously, one of the major things that is happening in the city that's a concern is affordable housing or lack of affordable housing. There's housing out there that is in need of repair, and there are organizations that do that type of work. Do you all? I guess the question would be, do people ever call in and say, I need a ramp at my house? And then can you coordinate doing that, or do you send them off to an agency that might be able to do it? So if somebody has the skills of, you know, yeah, I can build ramps. Can you help with that?
So we run into those requests. Hands on Nashville runs into those requests most specifically during a disaster response. But what it's allowed us to do is now we're aware of all the organizations that do that type of work. And so individuals typically do not come to us on a day-to-day basis and say, hey, I have a need for a thing. Can you get us volunteers to do it? But if that does occur, then we would refer them to the right organization that does that kind of work. And hopefully they're partners of ours. And if they utilize volunteers, they'll ask for volunteers, you know, via our website.
Okay. All right. And you mentioned animals. One of my goals is to volunteer out at the zoo sometime, and I just haven't done that yet. When you talk about animals, I know I assume you could help at Metro Animal Control or Humane Society or stuff like that. What are those opportunities, particularly with working with animals?
Yeah, so there are a few foster, you know, pet foster homes, and that are nonprofits. And so if you're interested in fostering a pet, like Foster just became a partner of ours recently. They're a fairly new nonprofit, but they're a foster home place. But also Pet Community Center, they offer a reduced veterinary practice for, you know, folks at an income level. And so they need volunteers to do things like that. So pretty much you can run the gamut between the traditional. The zoo you mentioned is also a very good place to volunteer, and the volunteer experience there is really cool, I've heard. So it'll run the gamut of things, everywhere from I go in and I'll walk a dog, you know, and it could be not the same dog every week, or I take one into my home, or I go to a place like the zoo that's structured, or things like that.
Okay, so you can't foster like a snake, can you? Just kidding. I know I've heard of the dog fostering, and I assume you can do it with cats. But you started talking about the zoo, and I thought, well, what if you could foster a snake? Not that I want to do that.
I definitely would not want to do that.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody wants to do that. Okay, so I talked to animals. I talked about the affordable housing. Um, Tell me this. Obviously, Hands on Nashville has been around for a long time. Unique stories, things that have happened that have either been under your watch or under the watch of somebody else. Things that have been just amazing stories, or things that have just, it's like, you hear about it, like, I never thought that would happen. What stories do you have to tell people about Hands on Nashville?
So let me start with one that didn't happen with me.
Okay, that's better.
Yeah, so the Hands on Nashville's response to the 2010 flood, it was a game changer for Hands on Nashville. And I don't think anybody thought that it was going to happen. So we were a very small organization, 4 or 5 staff members. And those who were around during the flood, I think, understand the Herculean effort that it took, because we ended up doing all kinds of things. Not only did we immediately send sandbaggers to try to keep Metro Center from not flooding, and social media was just really coming alive at that point, but we ended up being the case manager, caseworker for people long-term in the recovery. And we worked with a lot of nonprofits to assign out houses to be repaired to organizations that did that. And so our budget quadrupled from the flood. So that was a massive growth period. And I don't think anybody understood at the time what was happening and what the effort took of those 4 or 5 individuals to make all of those things happen. So I think that was one of the most amazing moments in Hands on Nashville's history, and really kind of sealed in Nashville's mind, like, Hands on Nashville is going to be here for you during a disaster. And so I definitely tried to live up to that in the tornado. I'm not sure, but I tried. One of the cool things that's happened, another cool story, we have done projects throughout the country, corporate engagement projects, because we get contracted to do it through our national group. And because for whatever reason, our team developed a real skill of doing this project management. So we did a project, a volunteer project out at a school, and one of my staff members is on here, and I'm going to butcher where it was, but I think it was South or North Carolina or somewhere. And the volunteers were so moved by doing that work in that school that that day, and this was just volunteers of a corporate group, and they said, we want to do more, and like now. And so they raised $20,000, or it was either $10,000 or $20,000 right there, that they gifted that school. That was an unplanned thing because they were so moved by what they were doing. That's like, that doesn't happen every day, but it was a powerful thing to happen.
Interesting. Do you all have, do you post like those things on your website? Do you have somebody blogging every so often about some of this stuff? Because there really are some things out there that are just so impressive, and it's hard to get the word out on everything. But that's a good example. That's a great example of somebody, of a group coming together, working on something, and then just being moved by the experience and saying, you know what, let's not stop.
Yeah. So we, when you sign up for Hands on Nashville to be a volunteer, unless you opt out, you get our newsletters. And so we send those out every couple of weeks, but we're also on Facebook. You name the social media, we're on it. Instagram, LinkedIn, all of that. And so we do have, I think, bi-weekly blogs. So we do a lot of advertisement, but it gets lost in the sea of everything that's going on, as I assume everybody's does. So we're constantly trying to figure out, how do we keep that word out there, and how do we share it? Because what I love about what we do, in a real sincere way, is that we are the good news. Right. And so people, they're always coming to Hands on Nashville because they want to give back to the community, because they want to be helpful. And so when you're hearing stories from us, it's uplifting, good stories that kind of restore your faith in humanity. And I love that about what we do.
Okay, a couple of other questions because we have a few minutes left. Somebody had asked over the week about, and I can't remember what it is now. It was a new program, something that you all were doing. Do you all have some new programs out there? I didn't know that you all had the program to link up, particularly computer technical skills. Other new stuff that you're doing at Hands on Nashville?
Well, this isn't new, but it's newly as big as it is. So we operate an Americorps program. And for those of you, if you're not familiar with Americorps, think Peace Corps, but for the United States. It's people that give a year of service, and it's a federal grant that gets done through the state, and it's pretty heavy on administration. But we operate an Americorps program where we place individuals for like 1,700 hours of service, which is about a year, into our partners. And so when I talk about partners wanting long-term, volunteers, this is a really good example of how we meet that. The question that your viewer was referencing was about that corporate social responsibility position. And so that's not a new program, but it is an evolving program. Like corporations, a lot of times they want to give back to the community, but they don't know exactly how to or where to. Sometimes they're just defining that for themselves, and sometimes it's well-developed programs. So we try to be helpful to organizations that are trying to figure out what they want that to look like for themselves, and then we connect them via volunteer projects and things like that to the community.
Okay. Cool. All right. I got two more questions. How do you all fund? How does Hands on Nashville get funding? How do you do you raise it? Do people? I assume people donate. Are the corporations involved? How does all that work?
Yeah. So we pretty much like any nonprofit, we get foundation grants from local foundations here in town. We get a state grant, as I mentioned, to run that Americorps program. And a large part of our revenue is that corporate service projects. So we charge a fee for that, and that we have a lot of overhead to run that program because they're big projects, but the rest of it goes to help feed the other pieces of the organization. We do annual appeals. We do have individuals that give to Hands on Nashville. So we do annual appeals and things like that, but that's the smallest part of our revenue. Most of it comes from the grants and the corporate program.
Okay. How many people work or employed by Hands on Nashville? How many people do you have on your staff?
Right now we have 15, and we typically use 5 Americorps positions ourselves. You disappeared.
Yes, I know. Sorry. I'm back though. Now.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. My last question for you. So is Hands on Nashville, are there other hands-on programs around the country? I mean, is it part of the national network? Because I didn't know that, and you said something about it. So is there like a Hands on America thing? How does that work?
It is. There is. It's actually, though, with Points of Light. Points of Light it's an international volunteerism organization, but Hands On started in Atlanta, the Hands On brand, the Hands On network. And our parent organization used to be Hands On Network, but they merged with Points of Light. So suffice it to say, they're Hands On affiliates all over the country. Hands on Nashville, we're in the top 10 of the largest hands-on affiliates. New York City, and they're not called hands-on, they're called New York City Cares. They are the largest affiliate. So a lot of the major cities have hands-ons. Some of them are embedded in United Ways, and some of them stand on their own, but we're all part of this big volunteer network.
Okay. And so which leads me to probably my last question for you. So do you all coordinate activities? So, if there is let's just take, if people want to go volunteer in Eastern Kentucky, and I don't know if there's a hands-on Nashville type program in that area, but or if there's a disaster, somewhere else, and people go, I want to go be helpful. Can they contact you all and say, do you all know of a program where we can reach out and be helpful?
We have made referrals, like when the tornadoes hit Kentucky earlier, before the floods, we got contacted by both some corporate groups and individuals, and we found out who to refer them to in other places. So we do try to be plugged in that way, especially through disaster response, because they keep happening everywhere. And so we try to figure out in that area, is there a hands-on affiliate, or if not, what is the group that is managing volunteers so that we can refer people to the right places.
All right. And maybe this is the last question, and it may be something you all don't do now, but it's something that could be done. I mean, obviously we have disasters everywhere and people want to be helpful, and they usually send money and then they try to figure out, is there something else I can do? But have you all ever taken a group to someplace as a group to say, we want to go someplace to be helpful over this weekend, and you coordinate, Hands-On Nashville coordinates with the group someplace else, and people go, you know what, we got 50 people, they're all willing to drive themselves, but we're going to coordinate and we're going to go help for a weekend. Have you done that before?
We have not. Mainly, there hasn't been an opportunity to, and up until recently, we were pretty busy dealing with our own stuff happening in Nashville.
Okay.
So it's not out of the realm of possibility, but we have not done it before.
Well, I go back to my days of growing up in Tennessee, just like you, we're the volunteer state.
Right.
And there are people that want to be helpful. And, I've known of people who have gone out of state because they want to go do something. They want to be helpful. And so they try to tie into another program some way.
Right.
But maybe at one point, after we get through trying to deal with all the stuff we've got, that I don't know, it's like the Red Cross. They
Right.
have people that are ready to move when they have to. They may be more specifically trained, but I know that Nashville has lots of really great volunteers that would step up. So anyway, just an idea for thought at some point. Lori, that was my last question. I think we are out of time. Thank you very much for being a guest. This has been really, really helpful, particularly on the disaster recovery stuff. We've certainly been through a lot, and I think people have done an outstanding job. Again, I talked about going into East Nashville the day of the tornadoes in 2020, and there were people everywhere helping.
Yeah.
And then I followed up the next weekend, and that's when I think I ran into a bunch of Hands-On Nashville people that had organized. So thank you all for what you do. You all are a very, very important organization to this city and this community. We are still working on next week who our speaker will be, but we'll be back next Saturday. While we were talking, the sun came out, and now I'm looking at, and now it's come back in. But hopefully everybody has a wonderful weekend, a good week ahead. Lori, again, thank you. Hands-On Nashville, the website is HON.org, correct?
Yeah.
And so if you're interested in volunteering, interested in donating, or learning more about Hands-On Nashville, go there. And hopefully we'll see everybody next week. All right. Thanks, Lori.
Thank you so much.
All right.